Oh, kia ora koutou. Welcome to HR Chats with me, Terada, a series of chats about the many and varied facets of the world of HR. For those of you who have watched or listened to this over the last few weeks, you will know that we always say if there is anyone or anything you want us to talk to or about, feel free to get in touch with HRNZ and we will see what we can do to accommodate that today. This is a good one. I'm looking forward. I look forward to all of them, but I'm particularly looking forward to this one. Supporting the multi-generational workforce. We're talking to Michelle Donnelly. She is People and Performance Advisor at BDO in Wellington. Now, the bulk of their workforce are Gen X or Millennials. They've got a few baby boomers and some Gen Z in the mix. We might as well categorise you immediately, Michelle. You're sitting down there. You're a cusper. What does that mean?
Yeah, kia ora. Thank you for having me here today. A cusper, yes. So I guess how I would describe that is I'm on the edges of a generation. So when you read about the sort of how generations are defined or structured, they're generally designed around or defined around the people who kind of have their formative years at the midpoint of that generation. Whereas I was born in '83. So I'm kind of an old millennial or a very young Gen Xer, depending on what way you want to look at it. So I probably identify more with Gen X than millennial, but technically, if you went by my birth date, I would be a millennial.
Do you identify as that? Like, is it something that you actively think about, or is this all of this labeling? Is it just a sort of a handy construct?
Oh, it's definitely a handy construct, 100%. There's no doubt about it. And I think that if you're having a conversation with people around the generation and what generation they belong to, it's very much a handy construct. And that's where I would say, oh, well, I'm Gen X, because I guess, stereotypes that have been put out there in the world, they're the ones that I identify with more. But there is no doubt that it is just a handy construct.
If you could sum them up super briefly,
yeah,
to give us a sense of why, like most people probably know, but for those who might not or just want to refresh a course, what's the sort of the basic construct, reasons for each one of these generations? And so what have we got? We've got, traditionalists, boomers,
Gen X.
Gen Z, Gen X.
Yeah, then you've got millennials or Gen Y, and then you've got Gen Z coming through as well.
Yeah. Great. So
yeah, so really it's around kind of the shift in society and the changes that society have seen and how different generations experience, I guess, life as they grow up and their worldview, and what are the big societal things that impact them. So boomers, we had traditionalists, which were kind of pre-war, and then obviously World War II happened, World War I, World War II, made a massive change in how we are as a society, how we function in our everyday lives. So that then became the baby boomer generation. So they were post-war. There was a lot more freedom that they were able to have, a lot more resources available to them. And then we moved to the generation after that, which was Gen X. So that was much more about trying to find kind of that work-life balance a little bit more, wanting to kind of make the most of the world around them for themselves. That's how it's traditionally seen. And then moving into millennials and Gen Z, who are this kind of digital, I guess, generations, who have had so much more access to information, access to technology, have experienced so much more rapid change than the previous generations. So that's kind of a very high level overview of how those different generations transition.
Yeah, because I think I've heard of Z also at some stage. They were called sort of, I think, Gen Z or something, or digital natives. They've never known a world without the kind of this digital platform. As we won't really touch on this, but so Gen Z is sort of around 96-ish. So now we've got a younger workforce almost coming through. If you think there are some kids born in, say, 2005, they're getting up to be 15. Are they going to be a separate one for Gen Z? When will the next sort of post Z generation come through?
Yeah, if you if you look at the kind of the research and the structures behind this, our next generation is already around. They're just sort of at that age of like 4 or 5, and they'll be Generation Alpha. And at this stage, kind of the studies that are being done are,
to be honest, Michelle, there is nothing even remotely ominous about Generation Alpha.
No, not at all, right? Like just
I've become quite aware of all of these party sides, ever since I totally, didn't pay any attention to the fact the sky turned orange at New Year's this year. I just went, that's nothing. So now it's something like, I'm hyperventilating at the thought of Generation Alpha. So what will they be like, do you think, looking ahead?
Well, yeah, it's an open book really, because they are going to be the digital native thing is going to apply to them as well. They're going to have access to all of these tools and forms of communication, but we don't yet know what will be available to them because it hasn't been invented yet. Like the technology that they will have access to and that they will use during their sort of teens and 20s and probably hasn't been invented yet because things are changing so rapidly. So it's a massive unknown.
Now, here's something that why is there so much friction around this? Why, we saw recently the classic one that went viral around the world, Chloe Swarbrick, said "Okay, Boomer" as a sort of an offhand, shutdown of someone in Parliament, and the world sort of exploded at that. What's caused all of this, do you think?
That's such a great question and one I could talk at length about. So I personally think, like my view, if you look at the research and you read back through the history books, there has always been this concept of the previous generation thinks that the next generation aren't doing enough or don't understand enough about life or are too green, right back to like ancient Greek times. And I think there's a quote from Socrates that basically says the younger generation are useless and they don't know what they're doing. And if you look at, when baby boomers were younger, they were being accused of being hippies and anti-establishment by the traditionalists. When Gen X were coming through, they were being accused of being slackers and not doing enough for their community and not working hard enough. We've now got millennials and Gen Z are facing similar criticism. So for me, the only difference is that our access to this information and our access and discussion around this information is on a much bigger level now because of social media, digital media. We're able to have this conversation with a wider audience, and people, as humans, we do buy into stereotypes. It's part of how we classify people. So it's so much easier for us to just put people in a box and say, oh, that's what you are. This is what I should expect from you. So unfortunately, those two things combined, I think, have created a much more widespread negative stereotyping between the different generations.
Great. So we've got all of that sorted out. These large societal things that go back to the beginning of time. How is this playing out in the workforce? Like you've got a younger-ish workforce, but you've also got some older people, and you've probably looked at the rest of it. What are the problems that are coming up?
For me, I think in my experience, the problems only arise when people buy into those stereotypes. So if you go in with a preconceived notion that because of someone's age, that their experiences will dictate that they're going to be more focused on money or more focused on themselves, or if you buy into that those negative aspects and ignore the positives that are there, I think that's when you see challenges, because I guess, as I said, people want to put people in a box. We want to kind of have a way to define them. And if we focus on the negative traits that we've read about particular generations, then we're obviously going to define people in a negative light. And I think the real challenge is to step away from that and embrace the positives and really focus on the positives that are there.
Because really, this generational stereotype doesn't really pay much attention to cultural upbringing, the region of, provincial versus urban, all of those things. We sort of just put everyone into this box, and particularly even when it comes to the likes of technology, boomers, they're on Facebook with bad memes and that's all they've really done. It's like, sorry, they kind of invented computers, Turing and the various others, but they were the generation that really drove a lot of this through. And likewise, we all have, even I know plenty of young people who are technologically relatively illiterate, just not interested in it to a certain extent. So all of these things play into a part of it as well.
Absolutely. And I think I know was it Amy Clark was on previously talking about diversity and inclusion, and she talked a little bit about intersectionality, and I think that's such an important thing to remember when it comes to these generational stereotypes as well. Like you could take two boomers, for example, from different countries, different backgrounds, different levels of education, different ethnicities, their life experiences and, you know, who they are and what they stand for are going to be entirely different. So the idea that if you are from a particular generation means that your worldview is a particular way is just so wrong. And that it's that stereotyping that we really have to get away from.
Yeah, I was thinking about it. You know, I did a lot of work in the provinces, and the difference between, you know, that rural urban thing. You know, everyone is utterly competent at what they do, but just the sort of the difference, not only in their kind of worldview, but in their relationship with technology, with media, with consumption. And so when we look at the challenges here, there are intergenerationally as well. They're the same challenges that occur everywhere else, aren't there? There's cultures of sort of there's a cultural challenge in that we tend to think that, I suppose, the younger generation is a little more liberal.
That's definitely like a view that's out there, and I think again it comes down to the individual. Like if you have been raised a particular way, given access to a particular amount of information, your views and how you see the world will have formed in a very different way to someone who has had a different background and upbringing, regardless of their age or generation.
Yeah. Communication is another one. We communicate differently. You probably saw the article that went around a couple of weeks ago that said people find a full stop in a text message confrontational.
Yeah.
You know, because young people don't use full stops. They find it a little bit aggressive. You know, it's easy for us to laugh at that and think that's crazy, but that's, you know, even little things like that are important, don't they?
They really are. And I think as employers and HR professionals, that's where we have you know, we have an obligation to kind of support people coming into our workforce to understand what the accepted forms of communication and styles of communication are within the professional setting. So for example, coming from a professional services firm, we obviously, when we have client communication, whether that's via email or letters or on the phone, you know, there's a certain level of professionalism that has to be there. It's more on the professional side than the casual side. But when we bring in our graduate cohort every year, one of the things that we do is train them on that. So we just have to be aware that how they communicate in their personal life is probably quite different from how we communicate in the workplace, and we support their learning and development so that they can understand that and know what's expected of them. Likewise, if we have someone coming in who has a lot more experience in the workplace and maybe from an older generation, their style of communication tends to be a little bit more formal anyway, but we would still give them the clear expectations and whatever support they needed to bring them up to speed with how we do things here. And I think that's the key. It's just acknowledging that if you want someone, regardless of their age, generation, to act in a particular way, or you have certain behaviors that are expected in your workplace, you just give them the support to develop that.
Yeah. How about, well, we're talking about this kind of sense of communication and this kind of digital thing. Is there a difference in the kind of personal versus company life in a way? You know, is there an expectation that they are, you know, perhaps Z in particular, put a lot more of themselves up on social media, that they then just sort of expect that to be not paid attention to? Or do you know what I mean? That sort of that blurring of the lines, where we might have gone to a party when I was at university and we took a photo of something occurring. That photo wouldn't really be seen by pretty much anybody. But nowadays a lot of that stuff is up online. You know, there's a change there as well, aren't we? Isn't there?
There absolutely
I didn't
is.
phrase that very well, but I think you know what I mean.
Yeah, I do. I think so. But if I answer something completely different, then you can correct me.
What I'll do, Michelle, is I'll just edit this and put in an entirely better question. No, it's
perfect.
fine. Go ahead. That's a digital world that we're working in, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. That we have that ability to sort of chop and edit things before it goes out into the public sphere. And I actually think.
No,
go ahead.
No, I was thinking specifically, I'm looking at, say, American politics or politics in general. That's a very good one, where there will be, you know, things that might have destroyed a career a few years ago up online. People of a younger generation are now a little bit more willing to allow those things to sort of just pass by.
Yeah, I think so. And I think those sort of younger generations coming through, and particularly, you know, Gen Z and being digital natives. So their whole lives have been with, with social media. So they've never experienced, you were talking about, at university, and if someone takes a photo, it's on a camera, it's not really going anywhere. But they've never experienced that. So they're very savvy to it. And I think that more and more, particularly with our graduate recruitment that we do here, I spend quite a bit of time going out to local universities, Victoria University in particular. And the more I talk to the students there, they're very aware of locking down the privacy settings on their Facebook, their Instagram, whatever else they're using. And they're aware that their like TikTok videos can be Googled, and are up there and are exposed. And they're making smarter decisions around that. So I think it's actually more of a challenge for some of us not less digital savvy, but non-digital natives, because it's been a transition for us. Whereas for those younger generations, it's just part of their life, and they are very savvy at knowing when to kind of lock things down if they can, and if they can't, talking openly about it and explaining it. So saying, yes, there is that photo of me there, or that video of me there getting drunk, but I've learned from that and I've moved on from that experience. They're much more capable of communicating that.
Has there been I'm sure there has been a lot of discussion in the HR world around that kind of privacy role. Do employers have the right to sort of, demand people's to look, or when they're recruited to go through Facebook or TikTok or anything like that. But do we still sense a little bit of that sense where, say, an older generation thinks, well, I want to find out everything about this and I'm going to go on there and,
Yeah.
I'm sure there are rules about that, Can you do that? Can you?
I mean, if it's publicly available, you absolutely can.
Right.
And that's where I come back to, again, that idea of people being savvy and making sure that things that are for their private life and that they only want to share with friends and family are locked down and secured. Because if it's publicly available, there is nothing stopping an employer or HR person putting your name into Google and seeing what comes back. But what we wouldn't have the right to do, and I would hope that no HR professional would be doing, is to contact a candidate and demand that they reveal their Facebook profile, or unlock it so that we have access to it, because that's complete invasion of privacy, and that should never be something someone has to do to get a job.
Do you think, in light of this, that there is a generational divide? Because I'm thinking, you're looking at something or someone, you think, I wonder who they are, that you're looking to work with or for, and you head to their social media profiles. And some people are particularly political in theirs, and you roll down and think, I'm just not particular. It tends to be sort of the older generation where they, is there still an assumption that people aren't looking or aren't paying attention, where actually people are very savvy now to go in and actually do little background checks on even clients or customers?
I think there's an assumption now that people will do their research, and I think that assumption has to be there. And the thing I would say is that I don't actually think that idea of doing your research, whether it's on a client, a customer, employee, whatever, that's not a new thing. I just think that the digital tools that are available now to do it or have enhanced the process. So I think if you go back like 30, 40 years ago, if you were employing someone, you would still have reference check. You would have found out if they'd worked somewhere where you had a contact that you could maybe talk to off the record. They would have done all of those things. It's just the tools that we have at our disposal have changed.
Yeah. Multi-generational workforces, there's a lot of benefits to them. Yeah. How do you get that working really well?
I think it's really, first and foremost, it's not playing to the negatives. So I think looking at your workforce and having a look at the different age groups that are there and what their different strengths are going to be. And that's just a starting point, because as we've already discussed, just because a generation is supposedly have these strengths or weaknesses, that doesn't mean that the individuals you're actually dealing with do, and that's their experience. So I think it's a good starting point to have a look at, okay, what are the groups of people I'm working with here and what might be their strengths? But then actually taking it down to an individual level. And I think as long as you have really open lines of communication and you're really enabling collaboration in your workforce, then you can find ways to work with all of the different generations, age groups, people at different points of their career. Because at the end of the day, I do think that everybody wants the same thing out of their work life, or very similar things. I don't think that there's this huge difference in what we're all looking for based on our generation that we've been led to believe.
And we're always going on about, the importance of diversity. And often one of the things that isn't, it is talked about a little bit, but we forget about that kind of intergenerational diversity as well, that
Yeah.
diversity of experience. How, anything specific to support the different generations across workforce? Again, I know it goes back to people's background and whatnot, but anything that you've picked up that suits perhaps different groups?
I think just really acknowledging that different support might be required. So I really don't like the idea of, for example, if you're introducing new technology into your workplace, that your people of a certain age are automatically going to struggle with it. That might be true in some cases, but I don't think that's a blanket assumption that you can make. What you need to do to conquer that is actually look at what the different levels of support. So if you're implementing something like that, or any new kind of initiative really, you're going to have different implementation models to facilitate the support that different groups are going to need. And that comes back to that diversity across lots of different levels and strains, not just age and generation. But I think it's really important to assess, okay, if we're going to roll this out, where are the groups of people that will embrace this really quickly and run with it? Where are the groups of people that will struggle with different aspects of it? And how do we support that?
We've talked a lot about, the technological side of things, which
Yeah.
seems, one of the most sort of foremost of the generational divides. But how about, there's two other things as well, I think. What about flexibility and expectations? Is there different notions around what people expect these days from, I guess, workplace flexibility? And is that a generational thing, or is that just something that's coming through the whole workforce?
I think it's something, in my experience anyway, that's coming through the whole workforce. I think where the generational difference has come is in terms of people vocalizing those needs or those wants. And so I think our younger generations coming through are much quicker to kind of raise their hand and say, hey, this would work better for me. Is there any chance that we could have this working arrangement instead of, a traditional 9 to 5? I think they're much quicker and much more confident to vocalize that. But when we have introduced different flexibility options, the full span of our workforce are embracing it, or taking opportunities from it. It's not something that is only being embraced by the younger generation. So for me, the difference is in the ability to kind of raise your voice and say, this is what I would like, more so than the want or need for that flexibility.
I guess that goes then into that sense of expectation as well. Is a difference in expectations that may not necessarily uh, be something that could be a possibility. I know I was talking to a friend of mine in a law firm, a senior kind of partner who said, look, we've got a lot of the young grads coming through and they do want to work from home, but that's their expectation to be able to do that. But actually, they also need to be back in the office because that's where they're getting a lot of the kind of actual experience, that intergenerational experience when they're standing around trying to sort something out. And there's layers and levels of experience there that they might not get simply working from home, and that ability to talk to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really good point. And that's certainly something that we experienced here when lockdown happened. Because when we had the first lockdown, some of our graduates had only been with the firm for about a week before we went into lockdown, and then were immediately working from home. And it was a massive lesson for us in terms of how much learning happens just by osmosis, just by hearing those conversations and being able to join in a conversation that's happening that you maybe didn't initiate or weren't originally part of. So for me, I think the key is really with those new employees coming through who might be looking for that flexibility and that want to work from home, to have the conversation with them, to be honest and to explain to them why it's important for them to be in the office, certainly in that first couple of years. And it's not that they can't ever work from home. There might be flexibility within that, but a lot of their time needs to be in the office for that learning and development. And a great way to kind of bring in a generational mix there is to actually have some of employees, who are further through their career and maybe of a different generation, talk to them about their experience and how much their learning and development increased over the years because of the people that they interacted with. And I think that that's a really nice way to kind of bring the generations together and have some of that cross-generational collaboration.
Yeah. One of the stereotypes we always get is that the younger generations expect to arrive on the first day. You've gone and you've picked them out of the grad class there at Victoria, and they're arriving and they want to be in charge. They're looking at the top seat and they're going, yep, that's me, and I'm going to be there very quickly. What's the level of expectation? Is it that, I mean, that is a bit of a stereotype, perhaps a little bit of a misnomer, but is it simply that they are a little bit more driven, that they can see very quickly a rise in a career path more than perhaps, 2 generations ago, where you turned up and you worked your way up over many, 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 many years?
Yeah, I think it's a mix of things. So I think the drive definitely, I wouldn't want to say that they have more drive than maybe previous generations did, but I think the wealth of information that's available to them, they're very clear on what it takes to get to a certain point in their career. I also think that they are very open and I guess very aware of the fact that their career is going to be with multiple organizations and maybe take a lot of different paths rather than starting with one company and knowing that they're going to be there for 20 years. So I think their drive comes from wanting to make the most and take the most of the opportunities over a shorter period of time, because they know they're open to the fact that they're probably going to work in a different organization in 5 years.
Yeah. In terms of that as well, that sort of sense of expectation, is there more of a drive for them to younger generations? They want to know the why. Why should I work for you? And that's been a big thing. I know a lot of the big execs in the Fortune 500 companies in the last few years, you'll know, have all spoken about you've got to know your why.
Yeah.
Is there a different way of explaining or positioning people into roles? Do they ask different questions than previous generations?
Yeah, I think from my experience, they're probably more open about asking the questions and more open about the research that they're doing. And again, I think it comes back to, I don't believe that anybody who joined the workforce, 20, 30 years ago didn't want to know the why. They maybe were more interested in the, where do I fit into the bigger picture? How am I part of the organization's goals? It might have been a little bit more contained. But again, I think that comes back to the fact that, our digital natives coming through and those younger generations just have access to a wider picture of the world and more information. So their idea of the why has expanded. And I think that's quite a natural thing as we, as society develops and evolves, that their outlook on life is expanding. And so their why has become about a much bigger thing than just this one organization. They want to know, what is the organization doing in the community? What is the organization doing globally? And how they fit into that. So I think it's just an expansion of what was already happening.
We always seem so focused on young people coming into the workforce, now in these uncertain times. What about looking towards bringing in an older generation, people who have retrained, who have come from somewhere else, or indeed actually looking to bring in an entirely different untapped sector? I remember being at a building conference, and is it Alexandria from Girl Boss, Alexia? Can't remember. Fantastic organization, great speaker. She said, "Look, you're missing out on an entire group of people," and these were women who had their children a little younger, coming in at 30, 35 into the workforce, and actually bringing them into the construction sector. And there were plenty of people who said, "Actually, look, yeah, we've brought these women in, and they're fantastic. If you can get 3 kids out to school with lunches on time every day, that you can do pretty much anything." Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of other people outside of the young folk to bring in, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely, 100%. And I think you're really right with the current environment, especially. We are probably going to see a lot of people retraining slightly later in their careers than they maybe would have anticipated. And I think it's really important that we don't forget about the opportunities there, because these people are bringing with them that diversity of thought, that diversity of experience, and skills in kind of behavioral skills in the workplace that we maybe would take years to bring a fresh graduate up to speed with. They have all of that ready and built, and a huge amount of knowledge about how the world works in general, how business works in general. And I think that's really important, and definitely something that we should, as HR professionals and employers, should be tapping into. And I think that's going to become really interesting to see how that impacts the workforce sort of towards the end of this year and into next year, as we sort of go further through the pandemic and see how that all unfolds. It's going to bring a really interesting change to the workforce, and a really positive one, I think.
Yes, I think it will. Over all the years, you've probably seen some missteps along the way in an intergenerational workplace relations and things. Anything that sticks out where you think, yeah, I saw something and I thought that's a mistake, or indeed saw something and didn't realize it was a mistake at the time?
Oh, that's a really good question. Yeah, and I mean, I'm sure there's been hundreds that I have witnessed over the years. I think for me, one that stands out with a former organization that I worked with, and I actually wasn't in a HR role at the time, but it was just the assumption that a younger person coming into the workforce, so quite a sort of fresh, very minimal experience, um, almost being treated a little bit like they were stupid, essentially, like that they couldn't grasp or understand the concepts because they'd never worked in a business before. And all that did was completely demotivate the individual. And yeah, whereas actually if they'd been brought in and their sort of enthusiasm and that drive to learn had been embraced, they could have developed really quickly and gone from strength to strength. But unfortunately, they were kind of treated as the person who doesn't know anything, and that kind of attitude of, well, I'm the manager and so I have all the experience, so you need to listen to me and do as I say. And there was no room for conversation or collaboration. And I think we're seeing less of that, thankfully, now, generally in the workforce. But certainly that always stands out to me as an example where someone with huge potential and who could have made great impact on the business, it was handled so badly that they just became a demotivated employee.
Yeah. Look, it seems to me that, across all of these conversations, it all boils down to that same thing that, we mentioned at the start, we've been obsessed with since we began thinking, and that's that concept of stereotypes. We're talking about that danger of stereotyping, a Maori employee as someone who will take care of that side of things, that you have an LGBT person, they will take care of that side of things. If you've got a young person, we'll get them to do all the tech.
Yeah.
So again, it's just that sort of danger of putting people into these categories, or indeed then if they do have skills in those areas, exploiting them in a
Yeah.
way. Is there a danger that they are continue to just be exploited because they are perceived as being a little younger, a little tech savvy, perhaps?
I think so, yeah. And I think that comes back to the communication side of things again. I think you have to keep having these conversations with your employees. So if you have a younger employee who is quite tech savvy and you lean heavily on them for those tech solutions in your workplace, is that what they want? Is that why they joined the company? Is that why they're there? Is that still allowing them to develop in other areas? Have those conversations with them. Ensure that you're working with them so that, yes, skills that they have can be used for the organization, but that they're not being pigeonholed or sidelined because of it. And I think, yeah, that applies in any kind of situation where there's diversity. Talk to the employee, see what they want to do. They might be really happy to support and to lead in an area, but don't assume that they are because of their, generation, their ethnicity, their sexuality, whatever it is. Have the conversation with them.
And of course, it's never too late to upskill or reskill.
Absolutely not. I think that's really, really key. And, for me, my sort of HR career came a little bit later in life, and it's been the best kind of decision and the best passion that I've followed. So I'm a big supporter of that idea of it's never too late.
And indeed, I think you've just done the Emerging HR Professional Accreditation.
Yes, I have. So that's been really exciting. So HRNZ launched that recently, just earlier this year. So it's for early career professionals to kind of give that accreditation and kind of show that you are committed to a career and to developing in the HR space. So that's been a really exciting experience for me. First of all, just getting together all of the kind of information that I needed to for the application that really showed me actually how much experience I have had over the past couple of years and the work that I've done. And then to be accepted onto the, as an accredited member in that space was really exciting, and I'm really proud of it. Great.
You look sort of a living example of everything we're talking about. Yeah. Sensational cusper.
Yeah.
It's going to be my word of the day.
I might get a little badge with that printed on it and start wearing it.
That is the most Gen X thing I think I've ever heard. Millennials aren't going to print off a badge. No. Hey, look, there is, as we've discussed, there's no shortage of sort of things to sidestep around when it comes to sort of intergenerational scenarios. But really, again, it's just a kind of, it's all up to the individuals. One of the things I liked, I was just noting down some things early on, mutual mentoring.
Yeah. That's, I think, a really great initiative that a lot of organizations have seen success with, that cross-generational or mutual mentoring, or upwards mentoring, it's often referred to as well, where you can pair two people of different generations or different stages of their career, and rather than it being the more experienced person or the older person mentoring the younger person, it's a much more collaborative approach to mentoring. So you both identify things that you would like to develop or learn more about that the other person could assist with, and it's very much a two-way street. And I think that's a really great initiative and a really great key to making the most of a multi-generational workforce.
Yeah, look, I've seen a great example of this actually in the aged care and education sector. Kindergartens with relationships to rest homes, and so the kids will come along, and you get this incredible mutual mentoring of the vibrancy of the young kids with all that kind of wonderful experience and untapped riches of the older folk. And essentially, that's a kind of a metaphor for throwing everyone in together, isn't it?
Absolutely. And, that has worked really well, and they've had some really positive outcomes from that. So, if that can happen in that kind of environment, there's absolutely no reason why we shouldn't take those lessons and apply them in a workspace.
Marvellous. Anything else you'd like to add from your tend a few years in the HR world around this multi-generational workforce?
I think just for me, the real message is around not getting bogged down in those stereotypes. Like we use them as humans for very valid reasons sometimes, but I think we can run away with them and let them kind of take us off in the wrong direction. So my main advice for anybody working in a multi-generational work space would be, like, don't buy into the negative aspects of the stereotypes, and where there are positive aspects, investigate them, find out if it's true for your workforce, and if it is, how can you leverage that for the positives for your employees and also for the organization.
Marvellous, and probably great lessons there to take you back into family and community situations as well, I would imagine.
Absolutely.
Because it is a funny thing, it was one of the great things. Here's a question. I was going to finish it, but now I've got another question. Is some of this sort of intergenerational thing a result of, I suppose, a very Western model of a nuclear family, where you're not exposed to a lot of intergenerational family relationships or community relationships because of the nature of the way that we in this kind of modern Eurocentric world live?
That's a really good perspective. I would say from my experience, that's very valid. I think a kind of westernized societal structure, we don't have a lot of intergenerational, I guess, not socializing isn't quite the right word, but we don't spend as much time with other generations, certainly not between, like your grandparents down to grandchildren. There isn't the same level of communication and relationship building as goes on in maybe some of the more Eastern philosophy-based cultures. So I think that's a really, really great insight and observation, and I think it could play a lot into part of the divide between generations.
No, it's just one of those things I was just thinking of, that fact that you do see, a lot of cultures spending a lot of, multi-generations in houses. You've got grandparents and great-grandparents and aunties and kids, and there is a lot of that sort of intergenerational mingling that many other people sort of don't get advantage to. Because I grew up across the paddock from my grandparents, that ability to go and learn, just to spend time and to see, you actually then you get a chance to see the kinds of skills that you might not otherwise see if you were, I suppose, simply in a workplace, or you didn't see it until you were older.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a real valid point. Having that exposure from early childhood will make a huge difference to how you see the world.
Marvellous. What a great and rapidly changing world it is too. I'm looking forward to Generation Alpha coming through and just sorting it all out with their yet to be developed technology.
Absolutely.
Marvellous. What's next for you, Michelle?
So I think for me, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. Essentially, keep learning, and definitely keep trying to develop my skills and knowledge base in the HR space. For me, my next focus is obviously wanting to achieve full chartered membership with HRNZ. So the choices that I'll be making around my career and development going forward will sort of be with a goal to taking that next step in my accreditation.
Well, all the very best with that. Michelle Donnelly, People and Performance Advisor at BDO in New Zealand. We've been talking about supporting the multi-generational workforce. This has been HR Chats with me, Terada. As we said at the start, if there's anything else you want to hear us talking about, anyone you want to hear us talking to, feel free to get in touch with HRNZ. The link is on the website. From me, for now, that is all.